We'll start with the story. Getting married, it's 2005. This is our wedding song, and this is the verse from the wedding song, which is, we said we'd walk together, baby, come what may. That come the twilight, should we lose our way? If as we're walking, our hands should slip free, I'll wait for you, and should I fall behind, wait for me. This song was so desperately important in our lives in what followed. And some of what I have to say is a little bit difficult, and I hope to bring you through it. But I want you to know that the difficult part of my story that I'm going to talk to you about is very much brought from a place of happiness, joy, and meaning. And in many ways, it's the adversity and challenge of life, and how, if we embrace it without judgment and with openness, we can create joy and meaning and purpose in our own lives. And I hope to convince you about that as we talk. And you're more than welcome to question me if I haven't at the end. So I want to start the story in Spain. It is 2010. I've just sold shares in a company. I had a very successful financial services career. I built my own businesses. I'd exited a company in 2010. We were financially in a very secure position. We had our first child at that stage, who was 3 years of age. My wife was pregnant on our second child. And we're sitting in this beautiful Spanish square, having a nice meal. It's January. We've exited the UK to get away from the dreary weather, and we thought we'd go and get some sun. I said the fateful words that I would live to regret. I was sitting with Beatrice. I can still remember putting my hand on hers and saying to her, "Isn't life just fantastic right now?" And it was almost like, you know, we figured it out. Huh? I mean, people get stressed about it. We figured it out. We've got the money, the house, the car, the success. We sold the business, the child, the other one on the way. Here it is. Life is great. I was 34, I think, at the time, or 35, and you think you have the world at your feet. We went to bed that night, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, I get woken up to the words, quietly spoken, not to wake up our 3-year-old, "My waters have broke." And many times you hear that, and it's not a bad thing, but we're in the middle of nowhere. And to be frank, we didn't even really know where we were, because you go on holiday, you just pick up your hire car, you go to a place on the map, and boom. So we're in this villa right in the southeast of Spain. No idea where we are. She's 25 weeks pregnant. It's not a good moment to hear those words at all. And it's 3 o'clock in the morning. So all you can do is, we need to move. We need to get into a car. We need to get out of where we are right now and figure out what happens next. And the best piece of logic we could come up with was, let's head west with the sea to our left, because the population centers are over in the Costa del Sol, and we knew Malaga was a major city over there, but that was 200 kilometers away from where we were at that moment. So we packed everything into the car and we left. And God knows what we left behind that day, because we never went back there, but we moved. We traveled for hours. We eventually found the maternity hospital. In 2010 in Spain, very few people spoke English, and we didn't speak Spanish. So we got into the maternity hospital. We tried to explain what was going on. Eventually they figured it out, and they said, "Okay, her waters have broken, and whatever you intend to do in the next however many weeks or months, you got to stop it all. You can't move from here. She can't leave this hospital. We need to get her into a ward ASAP and try and make sure that we stabilize her as best we can, so that we can use whatever means necessary to help this baby develop his lungs and develop his chance of survival." So she goes off to hospital. I now have a 3-year-old. We have a house in the UK. I have a business that I'm still involved with but sold out of. We have our lives. Everything has to stop. I have to find a kindergarten. I have to find a place to live. And away we go. And we have this guy with us. We made a pact straight away. This is a crisis moment. And what we don't want to do is to have his life defined by whatever's going to happen next. So we made a commitment that one of us would always be with him, and the other one would be wherever they needed to be in terms of what happens next. And a week into it, it was all pretty chaotic, but we thought we're a little bit on top of things right now. Then I came into the ward in the hospital, and there was a bunch of people, medics, in my wife's room, and they were scrambling around, and they were rubbing an ultrasound across her belly. She was distressed, and she was crying and saying to me, they can't get a heartbeat. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I don't speak Spanish, but I discovered that internationally, if you shout really loud, everybody stops and looks at you for a minute. And that was the only communication tool I had available to me. And I said to them, get another machine. So they get another machine, they bring it in. This time they use video. Oh, yes, the child has stopped moving and there is no heartbeat. So it's an emergency cesarean. So she's whisked off. I say briefly goodbye to her as the lift door closes and she's gone. For the next 10 hours, I lost her because I didn't speak Spanish. Nobody at reception could talk to me. Nobody could speak to me. I didn't know if she was alive, the baby was alive. No idea. I can attest to the fact that I smoked an awful lot of cigarettes, and I sat in a little bar across the road from the hospital, wanting to consume a lot of alcohol, but realizing that wouldn't be great at that moment. And he arrived. So eventually, after 10 hours, I get some information, and they say to me, okay, your son has been born, but he's not going to last for more than 24 hours. He's too young. It's 26 weeks now at this stage. There's not much hope. Your wife is healthy. You'll get to her. And to be honest, when you're in that situation, the fact that your wife is healthy, you actually take a lot of joy and happiness from, because I thought maybe I've lost both of them. But 2 days passed and 3 days passed, and he kept going. So for us, it was a question of then having to shift our mindsets and say, well, actually, maybe he is going to live. So maybe we do need to step into this as a reality. So he's in neonatal intensive care for 5.5 months in Malaga. At no point was he ever healthy enough to be air ambulanced back to the UK. So we have to live in Spain. And this was where psychological safety first entered the realms of my mind, because very much in line with what was going on in our wedding song, we're now in an acutely stressful situation. And you can only operate as a team in an acutely stressful situation. If you want to silo, which was a great word used earlier on today, you won't last. And this isn't me, by the way, but we didn't take photographs of each other in the shower. But this image really sums up so much of what was happening at the time. You know, when one of us was down, the other one had to be up. And it wouldn't have been unusual for me to be on the floor of the shower, water cascading over my head, crying my eyes out, and thinking, why is this happening to us? And more importantly, why me? Because as a successful entrepreneur and financier and executive in so many businesses, I could always solve all my problems all the time. But of course, most of those problems were solved financially. This was the reality of family of vulnerability. And we became vulnerable together. So I had to let her see me cry. And that was the first time she'd ever seen me cry. Well, I tell a lie, because we actually spoke about this on Sunday night. I used to own racehorses, and I raced in 2008 a horse against the Queen and Sheikh Mohammed, and we won that race in Royal Ascot. And Beatrice said, "You cried then." You asshole. Because she pointed out that I didn't cry when our first child was born or any other point up on the line. But now I was crying because vulnerability stepped in. And now, to be honest, as a person who speaks continuously about vulnerability, I cry probably once a week. And in preparing this presentation and getting ready for it, I probably cried about 5 or 6 times just to kind of work it out of the system so I don't break down here and make you guys feel a bit uncomfortable. But we fought that battle, and for 5.5 months, we were in that situation, in that acute environment, and managing his needs. He was, at that stage, oxygen dependent. He was tube fed. He had multiple brain injuries. He had collapsed lungs. He had blood transfusions. He was in induced comas multiple times. And when they induce a coma and they put a baby on life support and they intubate them, it's horrendous, and any progress that you've made in their development is just immediately reversed. But they spoke to us and they said, okay, we're going to give you an opportunity. We think he's well enough now that we have a situation, an opportunity in Spain, which is called, pardon my French, I think it's called hospital domiciliaria. So in essence, hospital at home. Provided you could live within 2 kilometers of the hospital, they would train you to be his carers and then allow him to integrate a little back in and see how you get on. So we're like, wow, fabulous, right? Because first of all, this guy hasn't even met his brother yet. So he thinks in the first 5.5 months of your new sibling being born, they live in a hospital. So it was important that we actually let him see him, because they weren't going to let him into a neonatal intensive care unit. And we wanted to have this moment. And this is us leaving the hospital that day. Now, really, what does hospital domiciliaria mean? It means basically they outsource 24-hour care to you. But, you know, we're all optimistic people, so we embrace it for its positive. So we bring him home. And before we brought him home, they delivered this inordinate amount of medical equipment to our house. So we quite quickly realized our house was now just an extension of the hospital. He was still on oxygen. He was still tube fed. He needed his airways suctioned out 15, 20, 30 times a day. He had a lot of needs. He had monitors and heart monitors and the whole lot. But we were a family. And we were out of a medical environment, and that was important to us. And we got to have times like this, where we could be happy, we could see the connection between us as parents, and we have beautiful photographs of Luca interacting with his brother and holding a stethoscope above his heart, because that's what everybody seemed to do every time they met his brother. So it meant that we got to have times where we could come together as a family. And that was so important to us. But we were still stuck in Spain. But we're in rehab, we're improving, and we're thinking we're going to get home. So we decide that we'll come to Ireland because we had family here and there might be more support. I knew Jonathan Irwin, who was running the Jack and Jill Foundation, and ironically, weeks before I ended up in Spain, I was involved in a fundraiser with Jonathan, which my niece had organized. And I knew Jonathan from horse racing. So I rang up and I said, hey, you're not going to believe this, but we have a Jack. He's called Joshua, and I need help, and we need to come here. So we put all of the processes in place, and we thought, okay, our exit is January, and this was now November time. And January would have been a year. But as you head into the winter season, and people who are ill have more likelihood to be compromised in terms of their immunity, and this was Joshua's problem. So we were back into the hospital probably 3 or 4 times. It wasn't unusual. We're all into the car, all of the equipment, all the oxygen, everything in, off we go, boom, gets to the hospital. They take him in and they intubate him again, and he's back on life support, and all our rehab stops, and away we go. But you do whatever you have to do. And then on the 24th of December in 2010, it all went downhill again. We hop into the car, we go to the hospital. We arrived there. He's now bigger, and he's not neonatal anymore. Now, he did start off about that size, right? So when I say he's bigger, he was still tiny in comparison, but he was out of neonatal, so we're into intensive care. We made a different team. It's the day before Christmas. They take him straight away, intubate him, and we wait. The main physician comes out to see me, and he says, okay, listen, I've just spoken to your medical team. I didn't know your story, and man, I've just heard your story. I can't believe you guys have been living here for a year. But I'm going to be really honest with you right now. He can't survive. He said, we now have him on life support, and he will survive this, but this is the end. He said, if your normal medical team were here, they would have stopped it. And it's like a freight train that hits you. And a conversation that happens there afterwards is just like outer world experience. But also, in the realm of our psychological safety, we had had these conversations. We were talking about the fact that one of our children would likely die. And that was important, because we needed to be absolutely in the depth of acceptance around our reality. There was no point in trying to believe or think or hope for something different. But they wanted him to die in hospital, and we were not going to have that. So we tried to find somewhere in Spain for palliative care for children. There isn't anywhere. There wasn't in 2010. So we decided he can die with us. We'll take him in. We'll take him home. He's going to die with us. Hospital argued against it. He said because he's going to die in pain and he needs to have morphine administered. And we said, well, we'll administer the morphine. You're happy for us to administer everything else. And they went, no, no, you can't. And I went, well, why is this? And this became a battle. We had a lawyer, a whole lot. Why is this a problem? Well, you might kill him. We're like, okay, we might kill him, but we're bringing him home to die. So we took the time to sit through it and to have that conversation in absolute transparency, and thankfully somebody listened to us, and we took him home. And we had the most amazing 3 weeks of our lives, because we got to be with him in this environment where we were letting go of all the monitors. You know, the tape that he has here on his face is only because we were still feeding him. He wasn't being given additional oxygen. He wasn't being connected to heart monitors. There wasn't the constant beep, 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 beep going on. It was just, here we are. My parents arrived, and this photograph is taken on his last night. And he had that night about 6 or 7 heart attacks. Literally see him stop, breathing stops, heart rate stops, and then he starts again. So needless to say, that was a bit of a tiring experience, but he kept coming back alive. And it meant then that that night, we took him into our bed. He slept between the two of us. We didn't sleep an inch. We just literally were mesmerized by this journey and this opportunity and where we were. And because we had my parents here the next day, we said, well, okay, let's get Luca down to the beach with my parents. We knew Joshua was going to die. It was just minutes, hours, whatever it was going to be. So we wanted Luca out of the house. He didn't need to see that, and we'd have to have undertakers come and all that kind of stuff. So Beatrice went off to get Luca ready. She prepared food and whatever else and got him dressed. And I was with Joshua in the bedroom and I was sitting with him. And he was alive still. She came back up after she got them ready, and I was then trading places to take them off to the beach. And as she came up, I just put him into her arms, and as she pulled him close to her chest, he died. And it's one of those moments that blows you away in terms of humanity, because there's something far greater than what we ever really know. But I know he waited for her. I don't take it personally, but he definitely waited for his mother, and he died. And the really weird thing is, there's not really a template for this, right? So now we have a dead child, a live child downstairs, 2 grandparents. So I say, well, okay, are you okay if you stay with him and I'll kind of go and get them off to the beach and sort them out? And she said, yeah, that's fine. You do that, I'm okay. So off we go, and I get them off, bring them to the beach, get them all set up, and I come back. And all told, I'm probably gone for like 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And I come back and I kind of open the door and you walk into a house and you think, oh my God, like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do or how is this moment even going to be, and how has Beatrice been all this time? So I'm going to pause for a second, because what I continue with is a little bit more shocking than what I've just told you. And I'm sure for lots of you, this is a lot, right? And when I'm working with corporates, I talk to them about the importance of radical transparency, of absolute openness. Because when there is a void, there is ambiguity, there is unhappiness, there is uncertainty. And in life or business, we have to face into the reality of our problems. And I thought I had it all sussed until this moment. But what happened next was how human nature taught me more than I've ever learned anywhere else. I walked into the room, and she was in our bedroom, and Joshua was on his changing mat. And she was cleaning and stroking his body. And the best way to describe this was, it was like an otherworldly experience, because what I witnessed was not even my wife. It was something really deeply held that she knew how to do. And it was like as if she'd been preparing her whole life for this moment. And she was preparing his dead body. And she kind of looked up at me, and I said this to her on Sunday when we were talking about it. I said, remember that? And she said, yeah. And I said, I'm pretty sure you looked up at me and you smiled. And she said, yeah, I probably did, because this was just good. This was just what I needed to do. And then I stood there for another 15 or 20 minutes, and I watched her. And every time she was stroking and cleaning his body, she was like intently focused on every millimeter of his skin. There was nothing she was missing in that interaction. And then I thought, better phone the undertakers, because somebody else has to deal with this right now. I don't know what to do. So I phoned them up. I said, look, can you come? Our son has died. So they arrive. We get a knock downstairs. She's got Joshua dressed. I go down, talk to the undertakers. They come in. She comes down. She hands me Joshua, and I now have him in my hands for 5 or 6 minutes at the most. And I feel his cold body. I'd love to say that there was some impactful moment for me, but I was thinking, my God, we need to get this off. We need to move this on. Like, this is just weird. We can't be around dead bodies. This is just, I can't cope with this. So very quickly I moved to bring him outside and to put him into a coffin, and then it was gone. Let's outsource that, and they go. And there's relevance to this point, which I'll explain, but I was interested subsequently to research this and to try and understand it, and funerals and funeral directors became a business predominantly post the American Civil War. And for thousands of years prior to that, we took care of our own. We washed our own dead, and we prepared them for their burial. We didn't outsource it. I'm not advocating that you radically change that. I don't recommend it. In some ways I do, in some ways I don't. But I found this really interesting that we've outsourced it. And what I saw with Beatrice that day was an absolute tacit acceptance of reality and the closeness of it. And why is that relevant? Well, I basically screwed my life up over the next 3 or 4 years and ended up having a panic attack and multiple autoimmune disease and chronic anxiety and PTSD because I didn't grieve properly. I did what I was culturally given in the City of London in the 1990s, which was shut up, put up, and man up, and move on. I eventually went to therapy and thankfully resolved it, but my wife never went to therapy. Never went to group therapy, never went to individual therapy. When we came to Ireland, she spent a few months walking in the mountains with our dog. And she just came to terms with the fact that he's dead. And it was that absolute entry point into that reality. And when I run workshops with corporate teams and leadership teams, I talk to people about the fact that, and this always raises an eyebrow, that we all have dead babies that we have to wash. What she did was radical in terms of the fact that she went straight acutely to the source of her pain and she immersed herself within it. And it resolved itself, and then the longevity of her pain wasn't there. I wanted to make sure that they could move him out quickly, get the funeral directors to take over their job. And the legacy of my pain went on for years. So the washing of a dead body, the washing of our dead child is the tacit connection, the tacit acceptance of who it is and who we are and what's going on. And the idea and understanding of how that impacts our nervous system is huge. And briefly, post his funeral, I went to set up another business, which I was flying around the world 180 times a year, away from my family, which are the cornerstone of everything that made me whole and kept me sane in that year. And I remember weeks after his funeral pitching to a board of directors at a bank, and one of them knew that Joshua died, and afterwards he said to me, like, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, this is what I do. It's now I gotta move on." For the record, that's not how to grieve. It backfires quite badly. But it's also the essence of how we deal with anything in terms of our reality. And Chantel, in the panel discussion earlier on, mentioned the idea of stillness sometimes. And ultimately, when I avoided all of my autoimmune diseases, which I have none right now, thankfully, and my anxiety, my PTSD, I was chronically ill. Adult asthma, leaky gut, IBS. I had pulmonary issues, I had heart conditions, I had everything going wrong because your body's screaming at you to pay attention. But ignore, 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 ignore. And when I started to pay attention, then I could resolve it all. But the idea of psychological safety or radical transparency in the realm of high performance is that idea of we speak whatever needs to be spoken. When I talk about Joshua, I say, yeah, my son has died. He's dead. He hasn't passed away. He's dead. It's hard, right? But my nervous system has learned to understand. Okay, it's the words that we speak. It's the language that we use. And in a workspace and you know, here at UCD, we want to create and foster an environment where people feel like it's okay to be vulnerable. Because the health and happiness that I had for that year when we were caring for a terminally ill child was one of the best years of my entire life. And the consequences of then giving up on that afterwards were quite significant. And we returned to our baseline. So if the living, breathing nature of radical transparency, psychological safety is separated and not lived in all the time, then everybody will return back to their bias. And for me, my bias was stoic, not talk, not cry, not communicate. And that doesn't work out well. So we have to give consideration to how we are operating. And I was listening to a song on the way here in the car and I wrote down the lyrics. It does sound like this is an entire talk around music, but it really isn't. There's a George Michael song, and the lyric was, "Be good to yourself because nobody else has the power to make you happy." When I work with leaders and high performers, I say to them, nobody's coming to save you. You need to step into you. You need to feel powerful to speak your truth, to be open to your vulnerability. And through that sense of purpose, you will find a connection and an understanding of where you want to get to. And we'll go to Q&A, and if anybody wants to ask questions, and it's always difficult when the guy at the front has just spoken about the death of his child, but please rest assured that this is something I'm very comfortable speaking about, and to be honest, it gives me great joy and honor to be able to do it. And it's interesting that it was a fear that I deeply held, because 7 years before he died, my sister's son died. He was 18 months old of meningitis. So I was petrified of the fact that one of my children would actually die. And they did. But I get to speak at these events and talk about Joshua and talk about Nabil, his cousin. Because when we speak about the unspeakable, there's a shift, there's a change. And there's an opportunity for us to be open and honest and vulnerable. And I do all of my work around the nervous system and the vagus nerve and all of the insights that I learned and studied. And then I did a master's here in UCD. And I've studied in the Mayo Clinic. And it's all the insights to understanding performance. But the most important thing is just how we breathe. Very simple. And I just want to give you one little breathing technique. And then I'll offer everybody a chance to talk, question. But if you join me for a moment, okay, so he was already uncomfortable, it's going to get a bit more uncomfortable. It's not going to be a Tony Robbins moment. You don't have to jump up and down, right? I just want you to to sit in your chair. And if it's okay with you, just open your body up a little bit and have your left hand on your left leg, your right hand on your right leg. And I want us to just breathe in through our nose and out through our nose. Nothing more than that. I'm just going to time it for 2 minutes. And I'll just give you a little bit of instruction, but I want you to just focus on breathing in through your nose and out through your nose. So don't use your mouth. And I want you to count your breath if you can. So as you breathe in for 4 seconds. And then I want you to breathe out slowly for 6. And just bringing that breath 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. And as you're breathing in that momentum, I want you to just also imagine if there was a piece of tissue in front of your face as you're breathing. I want you to breathe softly so that the tissue wouldn't actually move. So you're now breathing softer. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Your mind will go all over the place, don't worry, that's normal. And just noticing the breath and just noticing that you can breathe a little bit softer, you can take a little bit less oxygen in, and slow breathing out. So the tissue would not move on the inhale or on the exhale. Just bringing the mind back to that idea of 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. And just as you breathe, noticing where you are. Just getting a sense of your feet on the floor. Bum on the seat at the back. And the breath, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. You may now just start to feel some extra saliva in your mouth. You may have gulped already. But just noticing how we down-regulate our nervous system. And it's important because some of you may have been a bit upregulated on the back of what I was talking about. And anybody's had their eyes open, closed, open them now, or, continue to have a rest, it's fine. And if you want to continue to breathe through your nose, please do. But when we breathe like that nasally, what we're doing is we're just helping the nervous system know that we're not in fight and flight right now. We're in a relaxed state. And this is one of the things that I learned, and then one of the things that I teach. And, if Alan over there jumped at me right now, my response would be, and I'd step back. And I would, through my mouth. If he jumped at me, I wouldn't go, that'd be a bit weird, right? So when we breathe in through our mouth, it's like an alarm bell for our nervous system. And when we breathe in through our nose, because it's quieter and calmer, we're saying to our nervous system, it's all right, it's okay. Everything in this moment is fine. And as we breathe out through our nose, we're still saying, it's okay right now, everything's okay. And if you felt some bubbly saliva or you gulped, that's when you move into rest and digest. And in rest and digest, it's a good time to rest, it's a good time to eat. So it's how we access the opposite of fight and flight. The last thing I'll say, and I'll go to Q&A, is that when you breathe in, your heart moves up inside this protective cage, because this is a primal mechanism to stop saber-toothed tigers from killing us. So the heart moves in and it goes inside. It's in a restricted area, so it beats faster on the inhale. And on the exhale, it drops down, and it's all flabby down here, and it's a bit dangerous. So when it's outside the protected area, it's got more space to beat, but it's also telling your nervous system, we're all right now, which is why we extend the exhale to just help us feel more relaxed. And for anybody who gets technical on this, heart rate variability is a way to measure that now, and it's very accurate in the last 5 years. It's called vagal tone. It's how fast we can move from stressed to relaxed and back again. And you can wear these kind of things, and various different executive teams that I work with are all wearing these kind of things, and we're all monitoring each other all the time because Western people want lots of data and science to support the reason why they should do whatever they do. I learned a lot of what I did by living with these guys in Japan, and that is me. I still wear kind of funky, weird shoes because it helps me feel grounded when I'm feeling stressed. But it's just all about awareness of ourselves and, as Chantel said today, stillness. There's an Eastern expression which says, in stillness, I find my true self. And it was only when I slowed down and stopped all of the nonsense that I was trying to project out to the world that I realized that I could be a really good dad, a really good husband. And I pulled the needle of banking and private equity and investment management out of my arm, and I got to do this and help people, which was something that I wanted to do when I was 16 years of age. So it's gone on a bit longer than I probably should, and I do talk a bit too much. But how is that? Anybody got any questions? Anybody noticed their shift in their nature of their nervous system?
I don't know about you guys, but I felt the absolute stillness there in the room as you were talking. And it took me a minute to kind of be like, oh crap, I have to get up now and finish hosting the day. It was a bit of a moment, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's powerful, and you can use that in interactions when you're in challenging environments, when you have to go into difficult meetings, when you have to orientate a room. It just allows you to down-regulate a bit when you're dealing with teenagers. It's important.
I have a question, just a bit practical, but I think a little bit of a chat might bring us back out of ourselves, you know. You talk about breath, and even your shoes is a way of kind of bringing yourself into the present moment with stillness, as Chantal said. But what does it look like in practice when you're going from being somebody who's always on and trying to kind of make that change to being able to kind of react more like your wife did than you did? Like, what does that look like in practice? Because kind of saying I'm going to breathe properly isn't going to change you straight away. I don't know if it's too big a question.
No, it's a great question. I mean, I think what's really important, if you think the example of how Beatrice responded and how I responded, moving away from the challenge doesn't remove the challenge. So I often describe it, old wedding cars where, you've got the tin cans on the back of the wedding car and they're pulling away. We all have these tin cans that we don't want to deal with, right? And we're constantly going, oh, I'll deal with that at some point, but I don't want to deal with it, right? And then, you have a difficult conversation. We're work colleagues, and I need to have a really difficult conversation with Olga, and I'm thinking, oh, I should really do that, but you know what? It's her birthday today, I'm going to put it off, and then next week it's something else, and then there's something else, and I keep putting it off, and the problem keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the issue that I haven't spoken to you about is now compounded. So when I speak to you about it, you're going to be like, first of all, not listening, because you're like, what? But you want to know about the problem quickly. And this is radical transparency. This is psychological safety. We encourage people to be able to speak up and speak truth to power. But it works both ways, that in leadership, we speak to people when there's a problem quickly and just deal with it. Because we've all put those conversations off, right? And we think, oh my God, I can't have that conversation. And every time you have that conversation, it's not that bad. So our nervous systems are predisposed to always seek comfort. And growth is found in discomfort, so it's hard to do it. But if you operate like Beatrice and not like me, and move towards the challenge as quickly as possible, life just becomes less hassled.
That's a great answer. So then it brings me on to my next question. I'll let you come in a minute. But the next natural question for me, and given why we're all here today, is then if you shift that question to be from the perspective of the community, or a team lead, or a leader, or somebody within UCD, what is it that we can do individually and collectively to create an environment that allows that to happen or encourages that to happen?
Yeah, great question. So the three things that I would hope you can take away from me today that really actively feed into that is, the first point is active listening. And you've all excelled at that today, so thank you. You've listened to me. And listening is one of the most powerful things that we can do for another human being. So when you think about colleagues, you think about work, whether it's you're a leader or you just have your immediate colleagues around you, creating the space where people feel comfortable to speak and be heard is so impactful. So listening is a good way to go. And listening's hard, right? So how do you listen without the kind of desire to say the next thing because I've got something really important that I can change your life with, right? You have to be able to stop that moment. So how do we do that? We breathe. So we take an awareness of our breathing. So when somebody's speaking to you and they want to be heard, your mind will want to say or fix or tell, I can fix you. I learned this the hard way years ago. My wife eventually one day said to me, stop trying to fix me. I just want you to listen. So if we decide that we want to bring active listening into our workplace, which is so important, especially in terms of bias, in terms of integration, we have to have a tool to stop us speaking. It's okay to speak, but just listening is important. So using the breath to punctuate and stop you from that thing that you just desperately want to get out. Actively listening and then creating a culture where people feel it's safe to speak. We were, before we came in, you were having a coffee and one of your colleagues had...
Don't doubt her.
I'm not going to out her. Same colleague had a kind of a pip from a raisin or whatever in her teeth. And Olga said, by the way, I'm just going to tell you this, but you have that there. In Harvard Business School, they teach this, right, as part of their radical transparency program, that the first entry point is that you'll be willing to tell somebody that they have a bit of spinach in their teeth. Because it's really honest and it stops them going off and being embarrassed in front of other people and feeling embarrassed and everybody feeling embarrassed, right? So it's honesty. And then as you step that through, it's like, somebody comes out of the bathroom and maybe, their dress is kind of caught, right? It happens, right? But the most psychologically safe environment will be the first person to go up and go, listen, before you go anywhere, I just want to go fix that. So it's that idea of being able to be open and honest and talk about difficulty, because when we foster these types of situations, we then create really important environments to speak about really important things. The post-pandemic return to work, the data that was compiled was really compelling in terms of how different races and cultures found the return to work. So the white Caucasian community were finding it better to be back in the office. But ethnic minorities were responding to say that they find it more difficult. And when the detailed studies were looked at and questioned, it was they didn't feel they had to assimilate in the same way when they got to work at home. They could just be within their culture. So it's important for us to know that we want to create diversity of conversation where people can talk to us and say how they feel and maybe how they need to dress. And We don't need to have people conforming. I used to wear designer suits and Italian leather shoes. But this is me. This t-shirt is, whatever, 20 years old. These shoes make me feel comfortable. And I'm speaking here, and this is not the most comfortable of settings. So we create and foster a culture for people to feel safe. Thank you.